Thanks, Judy. So before I read, there's a few people that I'd like to thank because I wouldn't be standing here without them. Thank you to Adelphi University's MFA program and the entire faculty for two reasons. First, for the opportunity to be part of the program and to study with phenomenal writers and mentors. But second, for granting my request to stay for an extra year, because it was the time that I knew I needed to further study my craft, and I'm really glad I stayed. Thank you to the two different thesis colloquiums in which I participated. Round 1 with Judith Bummel and round 2 with Kermit Fraser. Both were so different for me, but so necessary to shape my thesis into its current phase. I must thank my fellow writers, whose creative vision and guidance motivates me. I not only appreciate your advice and wisdom, but more importantly, your friendship. And a special thank you to Heather for your love, your constant encouragement, and your steadfast belief in me. I would be remiss if I did not thank my thesis mentor, Jacqueline Jones-Lamont. You have pushed me, challenged me, and taught me to challenge myself with my writing, while always knowing exactly what to say and how to say it when I was frustrated, nervous, or overwhelmed. Your support, wisdom, and knowledge has infinitely enriched this entire journey. And last, but certainly not least, I want to thank my family. My parents and my uncle have traveled from New Hampshire to be here tonight, and I'm glad they're here. Throughout my 3 years here, as well as my entire life, I have never had to question whether my decisions would be met with their enthusiasm, guidance, and unwavering love. They are my biggest cheerleaders, and I feel fortunate to have and to have always had their immeasurable support again and again. So, my thesis is titled Self-Geography, and for me, the collection is very much a grappling and an exploration of the self, including one's gender and sexuality. And as I was constructing the thesis, I noticed that it was becoming a story in verse, told through the voice of one woman that evolves over the span of 3 different sections, each of which focuses on a different time and space in this woman's world. So the first poem that I'm going to read appears early in the first section, titled Genesis, and the poem is called Chambers. Chambers. The bath. Your fingers, free octopus limbs, mellow like moth wings, folded my infant body into the tub and lathered me with Johnson's nighttime wash. I splashed and shimmered in the soapy iridescence until you split into epileptic fits. Your fingers were locked claws, and I squealed and squirmed until I was pulled from the helix of water. Your bed. I woke to the smashing lashing of your teeth, the burble in your throat like broken pipes. The snapping, scratching of your nails were bird claws on bark. But you never noticed me, hanging onto the bed's edge, watching the clock blink every minute, praying against bed sheets that Dad would walk through walls and rescue me from your hands, and you from my fear. I hid from you in the bathtub for a half hour until you became silent, in sleep, and then I returned to my own bed, beneath my shell of sheets. The blanket. Your body flailed, a hooked fish plucked from the briny reef, and you christened the carpet with blood from your face when you buckled from foot to floor after your shower, still skinned over, exposed like a sheared lamb. You must have been cold, your body so seeable. So I inched beside you with my fringed baby blanket and cloaked it over you, your netted trap. My birth. If only I remembered what you couldn't. My head spread, your pelvis tore through tissue like a meat grinder, and unlocked open air in my lungs. and you receded into seizure flinches, remembering only pain that pulsed and pounded in waves before the moment I actually lived. But the more I lived and lingered, the more I became merely your parasite, detaching gradually from my host, my breath, my mother. The next poem appears at the end of the first section. It's called Shedding My First Innocence. I was a unicorn child. Born out of its horn, I lived among pixies and raked pollen from the yellow of sunflowers after the bees came. I balanced on needles and danced naked on grass tips, listened to the moon repeat my name and eventually sing me to sleep. Then I started over each time I woke, until one day when I was 11, I came home with blood between my legs, rust instead of silver, and my middle muscles pinched and cramped the crank of a wrench. The moon wept on my rooftop, cascades like drowned pollen. The grass turned to straw, brown and brittle, and the pixies moved on to another child. The second section of my thesis is titled Corpus, and the first poem that I'll read is called How Women Work. How Women Work. Its shade of wine muddied my clothes, and I never noticed the sneaky leak or sensed its slither until I found it hiding, so hushed, when I closed the bathroom door. But it did explain the squeeze I felt underneath my navel, the lobster claws clamped around each muscle, around my middle, twisting them until my body curled and folded in response, unable to walk upright with the twinge. I arrived at the train station with Sean, who said, "I know exactly how women work." Like a well-oiled machine, a conceited smog fumed from his lips. But I wondered, if Sean had leaned over the sink and scrubbed my blemished underwear, watched the lather burn red and swirl the drain, wash away part of what makes women work, would he still believe he knows? If I had sent Sean to the store in search of Tampax tampons, Tylenol, and cotton underwear, would he still know? If he had accompanied me to see my How Women Work doctor when she told me that my hormones are imbalanced and I might not conceive, or just to watch a pap smear, perhaps, see metal blades of a speculum dilate and expose the pink of my nether flesh, would Sean still believe he knows? I wondered what he thought he saw on a woman's outside that whispered him inside. This next poem appears at the end of the second section. It's the penultimate poem. It's called Relics. Relics. God defines marriage, said my cousin, reserved for a man and woman, and forsaking the other, the taint, the junction of sex and homo sapiens, the cartographies of the psyche and love. And I can't help but wonder why. Why is Maureen the one, pocked through time without compassion, the one without the desire to understand? And why can't I see her face in the girl from this photograph, 16, skirted between innocence and rebellion, the rough borders of youth and womanhood beginning to cross, a longing of motherhood layered in her eyes, her arms, the crook of her neck, a pocket where I nestled. God defines marriage, said Maureen, but I never told her she was wrong, never told her she has recast the past, or asked if she considered the faces she shuns. I looked at our photo and couldn't. So I thought back and wondered, what she might have said then or now if she knew the infant she cradled in her arms would grow up to be one of them. And the third section of my thesis is titled Cosmos, and the first poem that I'll read is called My Generation. It's written in a form called a ghazal, which utilizes repetition, and I wrote it as a response to a poem titled Miscegenation by Natasha Trethewey. She's the current U.S. Poet Laureate and a poet I greatly admire. In her poem, she writes about how her parents, her black mother and her white father, broke the law by leaving Mississippi to get married in Ohio because of the anti-miscegenation laws in the state during the 1960s, and how the laws of the state labeled her birth basically illegitimate. So when I wrote this, I basically thought of it as a response or in conversation with hers. My generation. I returned home, the home I made during college. But Carolina was lonesome this time, like the stretch and search for a Carolina ocean floor, but feeling only water below my feet. I came for a wedding in May 2012, just 4 days after voting scratched and rippled across Carolina. From mountains to coasts to churches to schools, a pandemic that forbid and quarantined other marriage, other unions, other love, like a Carolina disease. I walked my tuxedoed godson down the aisle, his skin like caramel between his white mother and black father, the care and line in Carolina, laws blurred over time and now redefined, fingers twined together, a shaded blanket. But as I held one of the rings and listened to the timbre in their Carolina accents like a plucked banjo, I wondered when the laws will change again, and I might return to wed a woman on the dogwood-lined land of Carolina. I'm going to read 2 more. This one is titled What Remains. What remains? If I die young, I want to die on a moonlit bed of juniper, with sassafras in my hair and lightning bugs by my feet to guide the way. I get the feeling sometimes I'll die, young, with mascara still stroked around my eyes and my uterus empty, a folded map. Nothing and no one to show the roots of my presence or past before I have the chance to wear my life in my skin like the rings of a tree. I'm afraid I'll die young, and maybe I'm the only one, but if it's true, I don't want to plunge into a landfill of bones, an unfilled bag of trash. If I die young, burn me, crumble me, toss me in the ocean, and I will be the Angelica in the hair of mermaids. Or, if I die young, drop me from the stars and let me land in the wings of swallows, just as I did that night, in sleep, watching a cloud reach up to embrace the sky, arms open like a small child. I woke and wondered if this is where I begin to end. If I die young, I fear taking my secret with me, locking and hiding what I am, my womanhood and unquenched sexuality, a violin without strings. And I'm going to end with the poem that actually ends the thesis, and it's titled Elegy for Their Future Past. About halfway through the composition of this piece, I noticed that it was adopting a similar tone and theme as another poem, also by Natasha Trethewey. Her poem is called Elegy for My Father. In her poem, rather than grieving for the death of her father, because her father is still very much alive, the poem elegizes a relationship or the changing of a relationship. In my case, I was thinking about relationships that had not yet changed, but might. So Nevertheless, I began looking to her poem as a guide, if you will, to help me navigate through mine. Elegy for Their Future Past. When I marry a woman, if Uncle James doesn't come to the wedding because his Bible says it's a sin, my father told me he will sever the bond with his brother, like snipping a root from a flower bed and moving on. I told him, I don't want who I am to change, who they are, brothers born from the same womb, seeds of the same core, the boom after the war into near poverty. I told him he shouldn't shed his kin, unlace his blood, when theirs was founded first, miles before ours, their chronograph already in tick. But I am his daughter, he said, the intersection between him and my mother, their permanence, engendered of them and not with them. I thought about James and my father's past, their childhood, spun from the same fabric, and now jackknifed into two conflicting roads. And me, flanked between them, the present and the former, between compassion and contempt, our lineage, our name, between where we are now and where we are going. Thank you.